Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do ye not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, at what time ye hear the sound of the clarinet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dual chimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. I want to speak on this subject tonight, kind of a long title. Stop telling your God about your problems and tell your problems about your God. Stop telling your God about your problems and tell your problems about your God. Too many times we as Christians in our lives, we are caught up in how big our problems are, how big the situation is that we are surrounded with, and we somehow forget how big our God is, don't we? We can learn a lesson tonight from the Hebrew 3 that they teach us in this story how important it is that me and you don't tell God our problems, how big they are, but tell our problems about how big our God is. This is what they did here in this story. Nebuchadnezzar the king in our story tonight was so lifted up in his pride because of the kingdom of Babylon that he had built. And Babylon was a great civilization in its day. Babylon was one of the 7 wonders of the world in its day. Babylon had hanging gardens and palatial palaces and things. It was a beautiful sight, they tell me. History tells us it was a beautiful sight. But Nebuchadnezzar got lifted up in his pride. And you know, when you get lifted up in pride, then you want to get attention. So the next thing he did was he decided that he would build a golden image, and I actually believe that it was an image of himself. I just believe it was. And then when you think you are a God, getting lifted up in pride like he did, not only did he think he was a God, when you think you're a God, then you got to start demanding worship. Isn't that true? That's the next thing that follows it. When you think you get so big, you think that everybody ought to bow and buckle and bend to you. Isn't that true? And then not only what follows that, after you demand worship, then you're going to do like most gods do. Most gods tell people how they want them to worship them. Isn't that true? Even our God. You know, our God say that they that worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth. Isn't that right? So our God tells us how to worship. Well, Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing. When he made this image of himself, stood up in the plains of Dura and demanded worship, he said, now what's going to trigger you all to bow down to this image and worship me is when you hear the sound of the cornet, when you hear the sound of the flute, when you hear the sound of the sackbut, when you hear the sound of the dual chimer, and when you hear all manner of music, you've got to bow, he said. You, every tongue, every nation, every people, you've got to bow down and worship me, he said. Worship the image that I made. Isn't that true? Boy, you imagine that. A man who thought he was a god, like the Pharaohs did. They thought they were gods. That's something to think about, isn't it? But understand what takes place in this story. When the music played, you and I know, when that music got to playing there and, people got to feeling the music, then they got to bowing down, isn't that right? But there were 3 Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that didn't boogie, did they? They didn't bow to the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And that made Nebuchadnezzar as hot as the furnace that he had. He said, because you all didn't bow, he said, and you all are officials in my kingdom. He said, so I'm going to give you a second chance, because you see, he was satisfied with their work. They were taking care of the kingdom. He didn't have to worry about nothing, because they were righteous men, you know. They weren't stealing from him. They weren't cheating and conniving and going on. He could trust them. So he gave them a second chance, because he didn't want to lose those boys. They were good people. So he said, at this time, when you hear the music play, you are to bow down and worship the image that I have set up. But they looked at the king, and they said, oh, king, you can live forever if you want to. And we are not careful to answer you on a matter like this. Why is that? They said, because of the God that we serve. Did you notice this, everybody? That they did not even pray about this situation? Notice that. Think about that. They didn't even tell their God about the problem they were in. It didn't say nowhere in there that they prayed, did it? Most of us, we'd have been praying the whole time, wouldn't we? So can you see what I'm trying to get you to see tonight? They didn't tell their God about their problem. They told their problem about their God. Their problem was Nebuchadnezzar. So they looked him in the face, and they told their problem about their God. They said, the God that we serve is able to deliver us from your hand, O king. But they said, even if he don't, we're not going to serve your gods. So can you see what they did? They told their problem about their God. They didn't tell their God about their problem. We sometimes make that mistake. We get so bogged down in our problems. And do you know sometimes your problem can rob you of faith? If you get to looking at all the circumstances, all the way it's looking, the way you're feeling, I'll tell you, boy, that'll discourage your faith on it. So they didn't tell their God about their problem. They told their problem how big their God was. They said, now we know he can do it. He can deliver us out of your hands. He can deliver us from the fiery furnace. But they said, but even if it don't, we're not going to boogie. We're not going to bow to your gods. We're not going to bow to the gods, they said, of Babylon, and we're not going to bow to your image. And the king got mad. He did the furnace 7 times harder than usual, cast them in. And the Bible said they were cast in with their clothes on. But because these men trusted in their God, because these men knew their God was big enough to handle any problem, and they didn't even ask him. That's the thing about it. Didn't even pray about it. But they did tell the king how big their God was. That he was so big, we fear him rather than you. And they didn't bow. And the old song had it right. They didn't bow, they didn't bend, and they didn't burn. Because God protected them and kept them in the fire. The Bible tells us that the deliverance was so great that when they were taken out of the furnace, that there was not even the smell of smoke on their garments. Think about that. Now that's how big our God is. They came out with that kind of a deliverance because they told their problem how big their God was, not their God how big their problem was. And you can find this throughout the Bible. I believe this is what happened with that woman with the issue of blood. When I came across this title, I thought about some other stories like that. And this woman's story is like that. We don't even see where she prayed. She didn't pray. Go with me to Mark 5. Let's look at her story. I'm trying to get you to see this tonight. That we should stop telling our God about our problems and start telling our problems about our God. He's big enough to handle it. Look at Mark 5, verse 25. Listen to what Scripture says there. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and has suffered many things of many physicians, and has spent all that she had, and was nothing better, but rather grew worse. Still don't see nowhere where she prayed, do you? It said, then when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? And the disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? He looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And Jesus said unto her, Daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Glance back up, if you would please, at verse 27. I want you to see what she did. The Bible said that she said some things. She said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. Well, who do you think she's talking to? She's talking to her sickness. She's talking to her poverty or her lack, because she spent all the money. She's talking to her lack. Understand that. She is not talking to her God about her problem. She's talking to her problem about her God. She said to her problem, in essence, she was saying, my God is so big that he don't have to touch me. All I got to do is touch his clothes and I'll get it. So who do you think she was talking to there? She was talking to her problem, telling her problem how big her God was. That he's that big. All I got to do is touch his clothes. He don't have to lay hands on me. He don't have to call me out supernaturally and minister to me. She said, if I can but touch his clothes, I'll be whole. She told her problem about her God, how big he was. That's what this story is about. She told her problem about her God. She told her sickness about her God. She told her lack about her God. If I touch his clothes, she said, I'm going to be freed from all of y'all. That's what she said. She talked to her problem about her God, not her God about her problem. We need to learn that secret in faith too. Let me ask you a question tonight. Are you saying what you have, or are you having what you say? We got to start talking to our problem about our God, not our God about our problem. As a matter of fact, the Bible even said that God knows what we have need of before we ask. So understand it's important that we have that kind of faith too. We need to bring our faith into that area to where we see our God is bigger than the problem. I ain't got time for you problem. I need to contact my God. I need to talk to my problem about my God. Tell my problem how big my God is. Understand that. We need to do that. Go throughout the Bible, you will find some other stories like this. I'm reminded of one. Remember the story of Abraham and Isaac? When God told Abraham, I want you to offer your son, Isaac, the only son you got. And he didn't even tell him at first. Well, Abraham was used to God not telling him where he was going, you know. When he called him to come out of among his people, he said, go to a land I'll show you. Just go. Abraham said, yes, Lord. Didn't know where he was going. He said, just go. He went. So Abraham wasn't worried about it when God told him, I want you to go offer your son on one of the mountains. I'll tell you of. He said, go ahead, Abraham. I'll tell you when you get there, like I did when I called you out of Haran. Abraham went up. Bible said he saddled his ass and he went, took a servant with him. When they got to the foot of the mountain that God showed him to offer Isaac on, he told his servant, he said, now you to stay here. Me and Isaac is going up, and me and Isaac is coming back. That's what he said. Note that now, on the way up, he had a conversation with his boy Isaac. You know, Isaac was a young man, really, at that time. He had a little conversation with him. Going up there, Isaac began to look around. I said, this is unusual here. My father, when he goes before God, he usually has a sacrifice. He looked, he said, wow. He looked and said, Father? Abraham looked back and said, what is it, son? He said, I see the wood, and I see the fire. He said, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And listen to everybody. Abraham didn't stop and take time and tell Isaac about the problem, did he? Didn't talk about the problem at all. He didn't say, I'm sorry to tell you, son, but the Lord told me to offer you. He didn't tell him nothing about the problem. He didn't say nothing about the problem. Understand that. He did not tell his God nor his son about the problem. And you knew that was a big problem he was facing. You're going to offer your son, your only son? If you had two, it wouldn't be too bad, but this was his only son, the one he had waited for 25 years. You imagine what a tough thing that would have been? On the way up, Isaac asked him that question. He looked at him, and he did not tell Isaac about the problem, but he did tell the problem about his God by the name he gave Isaac. He said, as they walked along, he said, where's the lamb? He looked at him and said, Jehovah Jireh, boy, Jehovah Jireh. We all know what Jehovah Jireh means. Jehovah Jireh means the God who sees ahead and provides for it. So you see, he did not tell Isaac nor his God about his problem. He told his problem about his God. He looked at the problem that Isaac went about. He said, Jehovah Jireh. Think about that. Didn't talk about the problem. Didn't even share. I wonder if later on he shared it with Isaac. He might not have. Because Abraham trusted God. So understand, we need to learn some lessons like that too. To tell our problems about our God, instead of telling our God all the time about our problems. I believe that if we become more God conscious and God inside minded, we could be that same way too, and wouldn't be so concerned and worried about the problem because we know our God. You know, he promised that he would supply all our need. Now, why are we going to be worrying about stuff? Let's tell our problem about our God. If there's a need in your life, don't spend all your time worrying and being concerned about the problem. Tell that problem that my God shall supply all my need. According to his riches, not according to my paycheck, but according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. We need to do that. We need to tell our problems that our God is still the God who sits high and looks low. We ought to tell our problem many times that our God is still the El Shaddai. That's the name that he introduced himself to Abraham by the first time, which means, Jehovah Jireh means the Lord who provides. I mean the Almighty God, the El Shaddai, the all-sufficient God, the Almighty, the one who's more than enough. It actually means the many-breasted one. That's one of the words it means, the many-breasted ones. It's like a sow that has many breasts. God has a breast for everything we need. We can suck on it. Anything we need, the Lord has it. That name El Shaddai means that, the many-breasted one. It don't mean that God's weird looking. It just means that God can supply all the need that we need. Isn't that right? The same way that in the mother's breast and in the milk of the sow, everything that little one needs, isn't it, is in there. Our God supplies our need. He is the El Shaddai. And we ought to remind our problem many times of who he is. That's who he is. Sometimes when me and you don't know which direction to go, we ought to claim God as our shepherd. Tell that confusion in your mind, I don't know what to do. Tell it, well, I got a shepherd. The Lord's my shepherd. Isn't that right? Jehovah Reah, he's shepherd of the sheep. We ought to remind our problems of who our God is. He is still the rock in a weary land, still that rock. So you began to tell our problems about our God instead of telling our God about our problems. I think we are too problem-oriented sometimes. We do. You ever been in church where every time you make an altar call, somebody's going through? I think there ought to come a time we ought to get through. I meet folk like that. About every Christian you meet, going through. It's time to get through sometimes instead of going through all the time. I mean, I want to get to the other side sometime, don't you? Even though the side was in a storm, they made it to the other side finally. It's time for me and you to not always go through with the problem on our mind all the time. Why are we going through? Because we're taking the problem. We take loads. Sometimes, we accept when people put loads on. They say, all right, take care. Okay. Give that care to the Lord. Isn't that right? That's what I have for you on tonight. Stop telling your God about your problems and tell your problem about your God. He's a great God tonight.